Hey friends, it's me, Em again, and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things sinister. If you're interested in true crime or if you like all things horror related, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. That way you can join me for some morbid conversation. Now, for this story, I literally read like a small little blip about it, and it sent me down an absolute rabbit hole. I was able to find articles on this story, I was able to find information on this story, but one thing that I unfortunately wasn't able to find on this story was a whole lot in the way of actual photographs. And part of the reason is this story just isn't a huge talked about story like a lot of other stories that we've gone over. It's not as well known, but as you guys know, that's a goal of mine to talk about more stories that just are not as known. Another reason why there's not really a whole lot of pictures, at least online where I have access to, is this story does take place in 1999. And as you guys know, 1999 was obviously before the internet boom that we have today. So the pictures and resources, there's just not a lot as far as photographic evidence online. With that being said, like I said, I do want to go over stories that are less talked about, that are less, frequent in the true crime community. And so this is still a story that I want to talk about. I might try to find some stock images to fill up some space. And I do have a Google Street View of like the home that it took place in. But otherwise, you might just have to tolerate seeing my face more in this story than in other stories that we've gone over. And I'm sorry for that, sorry. But like all other stories that I've gone over, there is parts of this story that just caught my attention because there is components that makes it interesting. And with this story, I think the thing that makes it the most interesting is had Michael made different decisions this day, we might have had sympathy for him. We might have been able to feel some empathy for him and maybe even pity him a little bit. But he ended up making some decisions that would not only result in his death, but the death of his entire family. And you'll see when we get into it, I don't think you're going to have any pity for him by the time the story's over. But let's get into it and see what you have to say. So Michael and Jennifer Gilbert ended up getting married together in the spring of 1997, and the two of them lived together in Brown County, Wisconsin. They would end up having two children together, Evangeline, who was the oldest, and she was almost 2 years old, and then Ivan, their son, came along, and he was 2 months old at the time of this story. And according to family, friends, acquaintances, coworkers, neighbors, everybody perceived the Gilbert family to be a very happy family unit. Michael and Jennifer got along amazingly well. They didn't seem to have any marital problems. They really genuinely seemed like they were so in love with each other. When their children came along, they doted on their children. They were so happy to be parents. And everybody said that not only were they happy to be parents, but they were great, fantastic parents. They truly did seem like such a happy, well put together, wholesome, typical American family. Unfortunately, that would all come to an end in the summer of 1999. When Michael failed to show up for work on June 14th and 15th, Jennifer's father, Randall Famery, would go over to their house to check on the family. He would end up using a ladder to enter the home from the second-story window and walk into a sight that no father or grandfather wants to see. Evangeline and Ivan would be found deceased in the upstairs bedrooms. Jennifer was found in the downstairs living room, also deceased. Michael would be found last, deceased and in the garage. So what happened to this wholesome and picturesque family? Well, from what investigators were able to put together and piece together, it appears as though Michael and Jennifer were engaged in sexual activity on June 13th. And during this sexual activity, they decided to spice things up. And they would spice things up by participating in an act called erotic asphyxiation. Now, for those of you who do not know, what this is either right before or right during an orgasm, the oxygen is cut off, and that's supposed to heighten the feeling. So oftentimes it's either done by a hand to the throat, by a belt, something along those lines. Now, I've said it before. As long as this is between consenting adults, I don't care what y'all do in the bedroom. I really don't care. However, with something especially of this nature, it is important that one, it is between consenting adults. This is a pretty serious thing. You don't want that sprung on you in the heat of the moment. But two, especially when it involves like choking someone, you want to go about it safely. You want to make sure you know what you're doing and you're doing it in a way that is safe. So investigators agreed that this did appear to be consensual between Jennifer and Michael. There was no ligature marks on Jennifer. There was no defensive wounds on Jennifer. There was no signs of a struggle. It looked like a completely consensual activity between the two of them. However, we don't know if this is the first time that the couple has done this before or if they have done it beforehand. We don't know if they know the proper way to do it and the safe way to do it, or if Michael just got carried away. But ultimately, what had happened that night is Michael did not stop before Jennifer ended up being strangled to death. And she lost her life during this consensual act. So now, obviously, we don't know for certain that it was accidental. But like I said, according to investigators, it genuinely did look like an accident. It genuinely looked like a consensual act between the couple that just went south. And this is where I say, had Michael made different choices and had he made different decisions, we might have a little bit of sympathy for him. We might have some pity for him. I mean, it was a consensual act gone wrong, and yes, it's on him, but you'd have room for some sympathy. And I'd certainly have room for some sympathy if the very first thing he did was call 911. But that wasn't the first thing he did. In fact, he never called 911. He would think about it and think about it overnight. And the decision that he made the next day, rather than to turn himself in, was to go upstairs and to suffocate his two children. So after suffocating both his children, we can only assume that Michael spent a little bit of time reflecting on his actions. We will never know what motivated him to actually go and suffocate his children. We don't know what motivated him not to call 911 or not to turn himself in or not to try to get Jennifer any help. And we will never know any answers to those questions. And the reason why we won't know is because not long after suffocating both his children, Michael would decide that he was going to join his family in death. And he wanted to make sure that it definitely took. And he would do this by consuming all the alcohol in the house, by taking all the drugs and medicine in the house. He would go out to the garage where he would turn on his car, and finally he would slit his wrists. Now, when investigators found him and when he was taken in, obviously he was, like I said, deceased. The cuts on his wrist were not enough to cause any kind of mortality. But what he did end up dying from was a combination of alcohol, drugs, and the carbon monoxide poisoning from being locked in the garage with his car. According to Lieutenant Craig Van Schneidel, it is likely had Michael called 911, he would have been charged with second degree reckless homicide. But given the nature of Jennifer's death and given the nature of the events surrounding it, he said that it was likely that Michael wouldn't have actually faced any charges from this. So to me, this case is kind of a wild one. Like I said, it's not talked about, but it just seems so bizarre that so many people in the Gilbert family's life talked about how much this couple loved each other and how much they loved their babies and how they were such a great family. And it just seemed so out of character for Michael to just snap and end up killing his babies and himself. And I get like he if it was an accident that he killed Jennifer, he was probably absolutely hysterical and devastated from that. But to me, I don't understand. If I accidentally killed my husband, if I accidentally strangled my husband, I would be on the phone with 911 trying to get him back, trying to have them walk me through CPR or get paramedics there so that I can try to save him. I cannot wrap my brain around a perfectly normal person having this accidental, horrible situation and it causing them to kill their two children and themselves. I mean, I guess people snap in different numbers of ways. And like I said, we're not going to know the answer because this is from 1999. The Michael killed himself. I mean, we're not going to get any more headway on this story, but to me it just blew my mind. They just seemed like such a wholesome and happy family. Everybody who talked about him talked about how much they loved each other and how much they loved their kids. And then and the sex was consensual. It looked like it was a consensual thing and it just looked like it just went wrong. And because it went wrong, I mean, that sucks. But I guess if anything, this case has taught us the importance of safe sex, both traditionally, make sure you're, practicing safe sex, but also make sure you know what you're doing when you're, you know, having sex, and especially when it's sex that is potentially dangerous. I mean, whew. Anyway, friends, that is just a quick one. Like I said, all the ones that I find might not be super long because I am interested in talking about cases that I have not heard talked about very much. And since they haven't been talked about very much, there might not be as much information for me to find on them as others. But I am still interested in going down that path and trying to find lesser talked about crimes and lesser talked about cases. And so if that is your cup of tea, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Make sure you like the videos. And if you want to be notified the next time I sit down here for another morbid conversation, make sure you turn on the post notification bell. That way you will be notified the next time I sit down right here for another morbid conversation. Until then, as I always say, my friends, take care, stay safe, and I'll talk to you later. All right? Bye.